Excellent. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second uh, version of our Unpacking the ABA debate event. I wanted to just kind of really quickly before we dive in, I'm going to let Rachel introduce our panelists today, but I really quickly wanted to sort of set the stage with a couple of ground rules. The reason we're doing this is because we want to make sure that everybody is treated with respect, whether that be our attendees, our panelists, folks who are joining us. We have a lot of people who are planning on being here today. So I really just want to make sure that we all are sort of on the same page. Let me go ahead and just pull it up really quick as I have it pre-written. So again, thank you for being here for this crucial discussion. Again, titled Unpacking the ABA Debate. We know that this is a topic that comes with a lot of emotional investment. And because we've gotten feedback about this directly, that's how we know. We have had many discussions about this topic. We've been reached out to many times. We're very well aware of the tension that exists in discussing ABA. Because of this feedback, we want to start out by making it clear that the Arc of King County's role is to present all types of information that can benefit our community from multiple perspectives and positionalities. We've seen this tension play out firsthand, and knowing that there's a high chance for tension, we want to be sure that we can lay down some ground rules right from the start. So I'm going to list a few. First, the purpose of this event is to bring people together with the goal of fostering understanding and respect. We have our own staff here today supporting this event by monitoring the chat and the Q&A section. We encourage folks to use those sections, but under no circumstance is hurtful language or direct attacks on panelists acceptable, and participants who use any directed hurtful language will have to be removed. The second point I want to make is that while the word debate is in the title of our event, this event in and of itself is not a debate. This is an event to share information about both sides of a conflict that we know continues to be present in our community. And because this isn't a debate, there's no intention of there being a winner in this discussion, right? We're simply here to kind of provide information. Third, under no circumstance are panelists or speakers to be harassed before or after or during the event. The Arc of King County takes safety of our community very seriously, and our speakers may or may not wish to share contact information after the conclusion of the event. So if folks do not share that information, please don't reach out to them. And it seems, I mentioned this at our first presentation. It seems silly that we have to say this, but we've seen it happen before. And we just want to really prioritize the safety of the folks that we're hearing from today. The fourth point I want to make is that please be mindful when sharing information versus opinion in the chat or Q&A section. The Arc of King County works really hard to avoid the spread of misinformation, and we're going to continue to work really hard to do that during this event. But we also recognize that there's like a really blurry line between what's opinion and fact in this discussion in particular. And given that it's not so black and white, really what I want to say is that we're going to do the best that we can to evenly weigh in on all of the different perspectives that exist in this discussion. The final point I would like to make is, again, to reemphasize, please do use the comments section, the chat section, I should say, and the Q&A section. But I also want to emphasize that it can be very easy for a lot of discussion to happen in the chat box, and the intention of this event is to hear from our panelists. So I hope that folks, while they do participate in this discussion, to prioritize keeping your attention on the panelists as opposed to kind of discussion that might end up going on in the chat. With that, I'm going to pass it along to Rachel to introduce our awesome panelists today. Thank you all so much for being here. Please take care.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was great. And I am so excited for this conversation and really honored to be a part of this conversation. Before I introduce you to our amazing panelists, I just want to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about the background behind this event, and also a little bit about my story. My name is Rachel Nemhauser. I'm the Community and Family Support Program Manager at the ARC. And a big part of what I do is supporting parents who are raising kids with disabilities. I'm also a parent myself of an autistic teenager who's 17 years old. His name is Nate. And the best part of my job is talking to parents every day and hearing their stories and hearing their experiences. And what I've learned in 6.5 years of doing that is that is a really, really wide range of experiences and a really wide range of perspectives on all issues and ways of being, but in this case, an ABA. And I am really proud to be able to share some of those experiences tonight, because I think we're all out here working really hard and doing our best. And it's really a wonderful opportunity to be able to just tell you what our experiences are and what we've been doing and going through. Before I introduce you, I want to just share how this event came to be, or at least part of it. As Scott said, this is a controversial topic. There's a lot of sides to the story. There's a lot of passionate opinions and perspectives and experiences. I spend time in Facebook groups that are geared towards parents of autistic kids. And this happens about once a week. A new mom comes in. I have a 3-year-old. He was just diagnosed as autistic, and his doctor is recommending ABA, or my mom is telling me we should do ABA. What do you think about ABA? They bright-eyed and naive, they asked that question to a Facebook group. And as you can imagine, it goes off the rails pretty quickly. There's immediately it becomes, or almost immediately it becomes two sides of a story. People very, very passionately pro ABA, people very, very passionately anti-ABA. And what's left in the middle is this parent who kind of wanted to gather some information and ends up not really getting what they're looking for. To me, that's why I wanted to create this event, because I wanted to create an opportunity for people who wanted to learn and wanted to collect information and sort of have the opportunity for a more nuanced conversation around a really controversial or divisive topic. The other reason I wanted to create this event, and we worked as a team to create this event, is because I think it's really important for us in my role, and working with parents, to be always refocusing the conversation or pointing the conversation towards the perspective of adults with disabilities. And I think for a lot of parents, that's a new idea. It's not something that naturally occurs to us. So any opportunity to draw attention to the fact that, in this case, autistic adults have a strong point of view about this topic, and it's important that we listen. This particular session is parents telling their stories, and the reason we're telling our stories is because we want to increase understanding, and not because we don't want to hear what we're being told, I guess. So you'll notice in this panel, we're missing someone, but assuming our third person comes, and even if not, you'll notice in the panel that there is no strong point of view being represented. I didn't put a panel together of parents that all feel one way about ABA, or even a set of parents who inside themselves have one universal strong opinion about ABA. I think all of us here kind of represent the complexity that comes along with this topic. So my goal in assembling this panel was to just offer a wide variety of experiences and perspectives to increase empathy and understanding. One note I want to share is that we really respect the privacy and the dignity of our kids. And also we respect the feedback we received from autistic adults, in that oversharing our kids' behaviors or challenges is not appropriate. It harms them, it harms the community. So we've made a decision as a panel to be really not getting into details about specific behaviors and specific challenges. And that's an intentional choice. And I only mention that because that might mean that in some cases, stories are missing pieces that might otherwise help things be clearer. But I think it's important enough that we leave those details out, that you might notice sometimes that someone's motivation might not make as much sense without all the details, but I still think it's important. So I wanted to mention that. Okay, with all that said, I want to tell you my experience as a parent is that just so you know where I'm coming from as I'm facilitating this conversation. I promise I'm almost done talking, and then I will turn the spotlight to the rest of my friends here. My son started ABA for the first time when he was in a year ago when COVID started. His mental health took a tremendous hit. His increase in really dangerous behaviors went up. And after years and years of really trying to avoid ABA because of all the, because I really listened to the autistic self-advocates in my life, I was at a point where the professionals, the doctors on our team thought we didn't really have any other options. So we ended up in ABA for a year. Took place right in our house where I felt like I could watch very, very carefully, and where I felt like I could have a really open line of communication with Nate's team. I think in some ways ABA started out really great for Nate, and he immediately his mood improved, and he started gaining some independent skills and ways he can contribute in the household, like going to get the mail or taking the trash out, things that I saw and noticed were a major source of pride for him. So I felt like that was really good. One of our top goals for Nate when we started ABA was to increase his willingness to go outside, to be part of the world, to take walks, to go visit with friends when he's really reluctant to do that. And for a while, we saw great improvement. And then by the end, after a year, I sort of found him back where he started in that regard. My goal was never in starting ABA to try to make him blend in or be indistinguishable from his peers or to be less autistic. And in fact, that was such an important point to me that I said it multiple times to our team as we got started, because that is just heartbreaking to me to think that he would ever internalize a message that I didn't want his autism as a part of our lives. But I do want his world broader, and I want him to feel more comfortable in his skin. And so that was and I wanted him safe, I think, first and foremost. So that's how we ended up in ABA. And after a year, we stopped. I think we all needed a break. It was a lot in our home. It's hard to be as honest with the team and provide the feedback that you want to provide when they're sitting right in your house 20 or 30 hours a week. So I found that a little bit challenging. And now we're sort of somewhere in the middle. We're not where we were before we started, but we're not all the way where we want to be. And when we started talking about this event, I thought, I want to create this event where I could tell people ABA is so awesome. It's not like everybody says. And as time went on and we were planning this event, I think I ended up with, I want to tell people that ABA is complicated and that ABA is complex and that how we support our autistic kids is really complicated too. So anyway, that's a really, really brief version of my story. And I hope by sharing that, you have a little bit of an idea of where I'm coming from, what my perspective is. And I'm really excited. I just saw Sonia show up as an attendee. So I'm going to promote her. Sonia, welcome. Hold on. I'm going to make you a co-host so you can turn your camera on. So glad you made it. Sonia, you're showing up just as I finished my big spiel. So I'm going to introduce you to our amazing panelists, and Sonia, I'll leave you to the end so you can have a couple of minutes to get your bearings a little bit. Our panel today is Shayla Collins, Kelly, and Sonia. Shayla and I are sharing our last names because I work for the ARC, and Shayla is the president of the board of the ARC of King County. For Sonia and Kelly, you can choose if you want to just have your first names or if you want your last names too. Okay, Shayla, why don't you take a few minutes, introduce yourself, and do what I did. Tell like your 5 to 10 minute ABA story.
Will do. Hello, everybody. I'm Shayla Collins. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you this evening. It's beautiful out there, so you could be many places, but I'm glad you're hanging out with us, and I'm glad to hang out with you. Um, I live in Seattle, Washington, born and raised Seattleite. Um, my sons are 10 and 9 now. Time has flown by. It is my 9-year-old who is diagnosed autistic. He ended up in ABA therapy at the age of 3 after having been diagnosed at 2.5 on the suggestion and directive of our care providers at Seattle Children's Autism Center. In addition to occupational therapy, speech therapy, and developmental preschool. ABA for us looked like 4 days a week, from 9 to 12. He went there from ages 3 to 5. So that's where you see me going back into my memory. I remember there were lots of other young people in the classes with him, though each one had a one-on-one therapist. I remember it was colorful and there were toys everywhere. And I would say it was an overall positive experience for me in many ways. I did for this panel ask Noah, who is 9 now, like I said, and he went from age 3 to 5, how he felt about ABA and did he remember it? He said no, he remembered his friends. So I did try to make sure I got an even answer here. What I think back on now, that was a part of the difficulty that we experienced in ABA was the amount of time per week we had to spend. This was years ago, so this was in real life when you had to drive from place to place and transition. And it was a rigorous schedule when you combine all the other therapies that we had. And I remember on Thursdays, there was a 1-hour parent meeting where we all came together to learn about more of the applied behavioral analysis and what's going on and what they would be teaching our children and how we could support that. After a while, we as the parents took that portion over and turned it into a resource time to share things like how to get a diapers prescription. Do you have a parking pass? How to engage in the National Parks Pass or the State Parks Pass. So it became very much a time where we wanted tangibles to support the activities that we wanted our children to engage in. And I remember it had a lot of windows. And so that's what I'll share for now. As we go through the rest of the evening, I'll share more of my story. So thank you all, and hello to my friends in the chat as well.
Thank you, Shayla. And one thing that really stood out to me there is you saying that, well, first of all, you distinguishing between was it good for me versus was it good for him? And kind of identifying those are two separate things. And also talking about the opportunity it gave you to connect with other families and parents and how critical that is at certain points. Thanks for sharing that. How about you, Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly. My sons are 8 and 5, and they actually both are on the spectrum, as well as myself. If there's any medical people in here, you know the percentage of that happening is incredibly small, but that's the reality of our house. I did not attend ABA as a child. I actually went undiagnosed until I was 30. I'm very good at masking. And I did not feel it necessary to put either of my children in intense ABA therapy. But as it turns out, due to both of them also having other comorbid disorders, they did end up doing ABA therapy about 2 to 3 hours a week. So a lot less intense than what you normally see. In the environment itself, it was a very productive environment. It was very helpful to both of them. And I wasn't in a place where I saw anything negative happening to them. I was able to sit in the room right next to them and be able to see exactly what was going on. And I at first didn't even realize we were doing ABA, to be honest, because we were going to an office where it wasn't exactly advertised as ABA. That's, oh, we're just doing this specific type of therapy for this disorder. And I brought it up one day to the therapist and I said, you know, as somebody who myself has autism, I'm not sure if I'd ever want them to do ABA. And she goes, well, we're already doing it. I don't think you've noticed. At that point in time, I realized I didn't notice and I didn't really know that much about it. So I have spent the past year and a half getting certified in behavioral health. And I am currently in the process of certification for autism spectrum disorder. Because I feel, for me personally, the best way to be an advocate for myself and for my kids is to continually learn to know more. I guess that's my story for now. And then as we go through everything, I can certainly add to that.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm curious, when you didn't recognize what you were seeing as ABA, is that because it wasn't a classic form of ABA, or was it because you just didn't know what you were seeing?
Correct. So the first one, I had friends who their children had done ABA, and they would record videos. And I'm in a very small mom group, and they would post the videos of their kids doing ABA, and I felt very sad watching it. And so when my middle son's therapist explained, well, this is actually what we're doing, I was like, no, that can't be right, because this looks nothing like what I've seen before. And it wasn't until I actually started my behavioral health certification that I started delving into the shift in how everything is done, and kind of moving away from how ABA started and trying to rewrite the narrative of what happens. And so it's been it's quite a learning experience for me personally, to not only watch that play out with my children, but to also learn how it kind of happens behind the scenes. Yeah, it wasn't anything that I had ever seen before. And I at that point, I would have never known.
Right. And you had seen ABA before, you just hadn't.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Sonia, do you feel ready to jump in? Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your ABA story? Don't forget to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sonia. I live in West Seattle, and I live with my husband, and I have 2 kids. They're older now. They're not adults. My daughter, Gabby, she's 21 years old, and she's in the autism spectrum disorder, and she also have developmental disabilities. How we end up getting ABA services? When she was 12 years old, she became so aggressive, and she stopped going to school. She stopped riding the bus to school. So I was very concerned about, and then I went to see her doctors at the autism center. And on that time, Gabby regresses every skills that she learned when she was younger. She was diagnosed when she was 5 years old, and it was kind of too late for her to she loses a lot of opportunities for take her to food therapists. The professionals at the autism center, they said to me that most of the autistic kids, when they reach the puberty, they regresses. Some they regresses, so she regressed a lot. And then she had, when I say aggressive behaviors, it was very aggressive. She was hitting me. She was hitting teachers at school. And then we needed to get, the therapist at the autism center recommended us to get enrolled in enroll her in ABA services.
As in
So
an effort to kind of reduce the aggression.
reduce the aggression, and also to gain some of the skills that she lost again. They say we need to start all over again. So we didn't know what to do. It was pretty, we were almost in a crisis. And then I didn't know, there were no medication for her. So the doctor talked about medicine, and they say it's not gonna work for her because my daughter is nonverbal and she doesn't know how to communicate. We didn't know how to know what was bothering her on that time, and that makes things very difficult. Having we had an ABA behavioral specialist that came home. She seems very that she has experience, a very good skills in the job, and then they used to come. She used to come twice a week at the beginning because she was looking for a technician, a behavioral technician, so they could come 5 times a week for 1 hour a day. So for us having a ABA support, it was like a miracle to us. She was very helpful. She had a good heart. She didn't, what I like about her, I was kind of concerned that she might, when my daughter act out and aggressions toward her, she might be discouraged and leave us, but she didn't do that. She was very eager to work with Gabby. She says she loved to see when the children get better and better. So that's how we end up with ABA therapist. I didn't see any negative, only positive things.
Right.
That she brought us.
Seems like you were seeing her progress, and also you were feeling like Gabby and your family were sort of supported and accepted by this person.
Right. She used to come in and used to say, Sonia, don't worry about Gabby. I will take care of her. You just go to the coffee shop and sit down for 30 minutes and take a cup of tea, and she will be here with my husband and Gabby sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes so for me to take a break from doing a lot. So yeah, it was not just good for me, but for her, because she had Gabby learned to have a great relationship with her, and she was very happy to see her coming. And Gabby was very I see that she was loving that she will learn things. I could see Gabby trying hard and she was very patient with Gabby. So I can't say that, that was, and I didn't see any abuse, anything.
Right.
Mm-mm.
And are they still working together?
Not anymore. The ABA therapist moved out, and the agencies couldn't find providers for my daughter. They were discontinued because they couldn't. They say that it's not a lot of providers to work with the type of behavior that my daughter have. But they worked with us for 4 years.
So that was a long relationship for your family.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Sonia.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'd love to hear a little bit about what your goals were when you started ABA with your child. Were those goals met? And looking back, would you choose the same goals again? Sonia, you want to start? You look like you
Okay.
have an answer.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, my number one goal was for Gabby to be able to ride the bus to school, and she helped us with that. Gabby
Because at
learned
the time when you
to-
started, Gabby wasn't attending school because of her challenging behaviors.
right. So she did, all the goals were met. It was for her to also for the other goal was for her to be more to learn how to be more independent, and for her to ride the bus to school and to get the support she needed to be success at school and with her life. And I
remember
also
you telling me when we spoke that Gabby loved school, so it was extra heartbreaking for her that she could no longer manage to attend safely. So this was more like helping her actualize her own goals for herself in a way.
right, and to also Gabby can learn also to trust people, and not to be afraid to get on the bus, and also to she support us to get more support services at school, like we she helped me to get one-on-one support services at school. And absolutely, and if it's necessary, I will choose the same goals again. Because looking back, when I see Gabby right now, I can see that it did make a big difference, the ABA services for us.
Yeah. And some of those improvements ended when ABA ended, like some of the good gains you had made, did they last after the behavior therapist left?
Yes,
Oh, good.
they did.
Wonderful. That's great news. Shayla, how about you?
Thank you. We had 5 goals, and I'll speak to the 4 very quickly and then give a nuance to the 5th. Our first goal was support with potty training, period, with or without a diagnosis. I needed help with that for some boys. I was learning. And then there was eloping, which had become dangerous in parking lots and things of that nature. There were fits of my son throwing himself on the floor and hitting his head, like on whether it was concrete or carpeted. And so then I remember he would touch his food and then wipe it in his hair. And so we asked for support with that. And then lastly, it was sometimes very explosive behaviors. Because he had a speech delay, he wasn't able to communicate everything that he needed to. And of course, we learned that behavior is communication. And so that also took some education for us to learn how to engage with that. The nuance is after we ended ABA when he was 5, we saw an immediate diminishment of the explosive behaviors, also as he learned better speech. What I was able to attribute it to afterwards and in hindsight, and I want to make this very clear, was I believe his diminished explosivity had everything to do with his diminished schedule. I could only imagine being 3 and then going from ABA from 9 to 12, developmental preschool from 12:30 to 3, having to be at speech therapy on Tuesdays at 4:30, and your mom probably driving like a bat out of hell. And then on Thursdays, having to go to OT. I attribute that explosivity to more being a tired baby than anything else, than being a tired baby who couldn't communicate that in other ways. And so after ABA ended, we had met all of our goals and also saw a diminishment in the explosivity, I think, because he was able to slow down and be a kid. In hindsight, I'm not saying I wouldn't have done ABA. I just don't believe I would have done all the therapies simultaneously.
Mhm.
And I believe he would agree based upon the fact that he was able to be a baby and got some rest. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's like definitely something that gets lost in the way new parents are advised. It's like what you need to do once a diagnosis comes in. The first thing you need to do is get 30 to 40 hours a week of ABA. And there's this idea, I think parents are told, like the more the better. If 20 hours is good, 40 hours is better. And it doesn't really allow for that he's a baby. He needs to rest. He needs to play in the sandbox and spill his milk and do all the just kid things. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And Kelly, how about you?
So I have to say that part of my experience is very similar to Shayla's. When we started therapies, my middle child, we started 3 different therapies at once. There were people rotating out of our house all week. And I very quickly noticed that it was too much. Not to mention 2 therapists were doing the same thing. So I kind of just said, okay, you know what? We're not going to do this. He was 2.5 and he was nonverbal, and very much like Shayla's child, he couldn't express himself. So he would smash his head into anything he could find that was hard. And for us, that was probably the very first goal was, okay, I don't want this to happen because this is very traumatic for everybody, not to mention it's harmful. We need to figure out something we can do as an alternative. I would obviously set that as the same goal again. Had questions. The therapy that we were doing that I didn't actually realize was ABA was feeding therapy with the Autism Center. And I would set that goal again. My son has one of his comorbid disorders is avoidant restrictive food intake. I said that backwards, but restrictive eating. And he did end up increasing the types of foods he would eat. And once we stopped, that completely went away. And the only reason that we have stopped feeding therapy was because of COVID. He had a feeding therapist until a month before quarantine started. And as soon as quarantine went down, for obvious reasons, there was no in-person, definitely not feeding therapy. I know a lot of places are still not doing in-person feeding therapy. He has been on a wait list since March of 2020 to resume that. I would still set that same goal. He is very restrictive and he is doing a little better now that he's older. My main concern right now is that my 5-year-old also has presented with symptoms of ARFID, and he is much more restrictive than my other child. And he just started developmental preschool and he goes to SNAP program. So it's very worrisome for me. He has not been eating lunch. So I try to stuff him before he leaves, stuff him when he gets home. But that is still a goal of ours. And I, in the process of watching my older one do it, I have seen videos of how feeding therapy can be harmful. That is not the case that happened with us. And that was a big fear of mine starting feeding therapy, was that I have seen my friends post these videos. This is the last thing I want to be doing to my kid. And it actually done in a completely different way, which was very surprising to me. I was astonished. I will say, I intentionally did not do intense ABA for the exact reason that Shayla had said. I just also want the kids to sort of understand being a kid. And I'm still also very protective of that. My 8-year-old, we just started a second type of therapy, and I get a little nervous that it's a little much, but he's very good at verbalizing if he does not want to go and is tired. And then we say, okay, we'll take a break, or we'll do every other week or something. If I could go back and make it more intense, I would. That's not.
You would not.
No, I wouldn't. That's not my thing. I don't think that the outcome would have been any different had it been more intense therapy. I think it still would have been the same thing. I think that quarantine kind of caused a recession in a lot of behaviors in my kids, regardless of how much therapy they did or did not have. I think that a lot of times it's hard because there's other factors and outliers that, go into what happens. It's also a lot of therapy to put on parents too, to implement at home, and it's hard to keep track of everything that you're doing. So yeah, we didn't have a bad experience with what we did do. Yeah, I just, for me, doing very intense therapy is not my thing.
No, it's not my thing either. I mean, just like personality wise, it's not my personality to just like constantly be working on goals all the time in my house. And also it's a lot, like you said, a lot of driving. In our case, it was a lot of having people in our house, which you really can't underestimate, like what it's like to have professionals in your house looking at you, watching you, judging your or it feels like judging your interactions with your kids. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. You sort of got to it, so I'm just going to ask you to answer the next question, if it's okay. You were talking already. What were your concerns before you started ABA therapy, and would you say they played out? I know in your case, you didn't know you were starting ABA therapy, but what your concerns have been?
For anybody who has joined the session and may not be familiar, physical restraint and physical prompting is some of the most invasive forms of any sort of therapy-led activity that you can do. And so for me, when I had watched these videos, it was a lot of, and I'm not talking like hand over hand, like, oh, move your toothbrush here. I do that stuff with my kids anyways. Like, oh, I'm going to show you how to brush your teeth right. That's
parenting.
Yeah. So this was more, and I actually just watched a video right before this panel started too, where they were holding the little girl's hands down and they were like, no, you can't do this right now. And I was just like, I can't, for me, that's not, if that's a form of emotional expression that needs to be worked through in order to be able to get to the end goal, then it needs to be allowed to be worked through to get to the end goal. Restricting something in movement that is not harming anybody, I don't find productive. Like the instance I was saying of my son smashing his head on the wall, restricted movement there, I do find necessary just for safety's sake. My youngest right now, he is a darter. And so we occasionally have to restrict and everything, and it's very hard. But it's not, I don't want him to get hurt, but he's not at the place yet where he can understand if he does X, Y can happen very quickly. And that's not something that can be taken care of. So that was probably my biggest fear. My other biggest fear was just, all I had ever heard about was very intense ABA, like that's already been spoken about, like 30, 40 hours a week. And I was just like, I don't know how I'm gonna take care of a baby and then do this ABA with these people in my house, and I'm trying to go to school right now. And so it was a lot to think about and consider in the process of how do we want to go about this and what do we want to do.
Right. And then it sounds like you said those fears didn't really play out. You were able to have a say on the amount of hours and the amount of restricting.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't even negotiable. I was just like, look, here's how we're going to do this. This is what's going to, I will let you do your thing. But if you start to stray from what I feel is comfortable for my child being able to express themselves, we're going to stop right there.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Sonia, how about you? What if any concerns did you have with Gabby starting ABA, and did they play out in the way it actually happened? Wait, let me make sure you're muted. Let's see if we can unmute you. Are you able to unmute yourself, Sonia? Oh, you turned your camera off. We lost you, Sonia. Okay, maybe we'll.
Okay, okay.
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yeah, we can hear you now. Can you turn your camera back on? That's okay. You can just answer.
I'm trying to, but okay.
No worries.
Okay.
Oh, there, yeah. All right, good. We can see you
Okay.
and hear you now. So what concerns did you have heading into ABA when you started it, if any?
I don't think that I have any concerns about that the BCBA therapist will do, something to hurt Gabby. Gabby has a very short time to work with her. So we divide the time. We help Gabby to start walking around the neighborhood so she can know the neighborhood, and also to teach her safety signs, how to wait for cars to cross the street. So Gabby loves to walk, and we walk for about 30 minutes, and then they come home, and then they work with Gabby for another let's say probably altogether 20 minutes, because Gabby has breaks in between. They give her a lot of breaks because Gabby is nonverbal, and then her way of communication is, aggressions.
Right.
So they couldn't push her farther, or they will end up in getting aggressions. So that's how they work. They didn't push her to work. It seems like because before, at the beginning, Gabby was working with the behavioral specialist until we get a behavioral technician. So she had a lot of experience. She was very patient, and Gabby was very happy with her. I think Gabby will see her like a friend, like her friend. And then it was Gabby easy to work with her. So I didn't have any.
Your concern was that it might be a little intense for Gabby, and then it turned out they were really respectful of the breaks that she needed, the pacing and the space that she needed.
Right. I had like I say before, the concern I had because her behavior was very intense. She used to grab your hair and push you and hit you, and she was 12 years old, very strong, and it was hard for us to deal with that type of behavior. So that was my concern, that she might say, "Oh, I just don't I just can't work with your daughter. You're gonna have to find another person. But she's still
I share that
with that.
concern. We've had so many specialists quit on us and so many people quit on my kid that is always my concern going into a new relationship with a professional.
Right.
Shayla, how about you? What were your fears or concerns going into ABA?
Thank you. As with any parent introducing their 3-year-old to a daycare setting or a setting away from them, I just had natural jitters of, can I trust these people? That went with school and every therapy. So that just comes naturally. Another concern that I had would be, would we be able to keep up with the rigor of the program in addition to the other therapies? Attendance was an issue for us at certain times due to the fact that I also have Crohn's. And so if mommy can't get out of the bed or to help babies, and if daddy's already at work, I was concerned that I wouldn't be able to be as consistent as was necessary and needed to help support my son, as well as be able to stay into the program. But what I did is the first few weeks when we introduced my son to any new setting, school or ABA, as I stayed, I wouldn't leave for a week or so just to watch and see what was going on. And of course, that necessarily wasn't, recommended, because it was always, if something was a non-preferred activity, the first person that you're going to call is mommy. Also, when he was 3, I wouldn't necessarily consider him nonverbal or non-speaking, but it was often difficult to articulate what he was saying, which again led to some of the explosivities. And I just wanted to see how his technician and the other technicians who were supporting would be able to handle engagement with him when he was trying to express himself. So I came in not being very trusting, and had to, work with them myself as well as them to be able to get more comfortable. But I didn't see anything that I felt was, outrageous. I saw a lot of things that looked different than I had ever seen, because I had never been introduced to ABA or seen it. I went purely off the recommendation of the providers, but I just stayed for a while until I felt comfortable, because I'm not, I don't consider myself a helicopter mom. I'm more of like a jumbo jet kind of lady. We can be, I just wanted to make sure baby was safe. And then we can go from there with the learning. So thank you.
I think that was my fear too, the safety, not the physical safety, because Nate started ABA at 16 and he wasn't a 3-year-old, or he wasn't, a little body like that. But I worried about his emotional safety. Like, am I somehow, or they or us, or somehow is a combination of what we're doing going to be sending him a message that he's not good enough the way he is? And that was my biggest fear. And what I learned in a year is that my kid's sense of self is mighty strong. And he came out, I think, after a year feeling like, I don't know what those guys were here for, but I'm just me. And that's kind of was my sense. After.
To add to that, exactly what you said, at that stage of the game with him being 3, I was so new. I wasn't even aware of the autonomy questions, or to question the autonomy part, or would he feel like I was trying to change him in any form. That only came after he was getting a little older and I had more engagement with autistic adults who were able to inform me about that, who were able to school and educate me and listen to me share my experience while I listened to them share theirs with me. So that was beautiful. I just didn't have it yet. I just wanted to make sure that they weren't going to hurt him, so we could all be safe.
And there's also a really big difference between the sense of self of a 3-year-old and the sense of self of a 17-year-old. By the time a kid's 17, your focus is like being you, follow who you are, become the best you can be. And at 3, it's different. They're still like one step up from being babies.
Right. So thank you. I just wanted to share. I did learn that, and I do listen. So thank you.
Well, I'm right here with you, Shayla. I wonder if you've talked a little bit about this already, but if you could share a little bit about what you felt like you learned parenting wise from watching the ABA or from interacting with the therapists, if there's anything you learned that way that you took with you.
Absolutely. I learned that I was extremely impatient and I needed support on learning how to break tasks down and how exactly to do that to better engage it with my child and then support his learning. I learned about backwards chaining, you know, how you put things together and then they come and help you finish it. So there were techniques that I was unfamiliar with because this had never been my background that I found very, very helpful. And there was the intensive program that Miss Kelly had mentioned that had a parent component where you would come in for an additional time and they would engage with you one-on-one outside of your child, meaning they would be there, but you would be separate and talk to you about some of the things that they've been working on and how you can support them. And so my goal was to try to be as in sync with the therapist as possible, while also being realistic about what my capabilities are and how much of this I'm willing to invest in at home. Because again, I wanted them to be able to be babies, but I was also trying to manage the pressures and expectations of following through on what the professionals had wanted. And like I said, I mentioned I had Crohn's. Well, I ended up in the hospital. So one of the biggest lessons I learned was all of this isn't going to get done in a day, and it doesn't need to. My son is a human being, he's a person, and the things that we're working on targeting now can be learned over the lifespan, and I'm his mom, and I'll be here. But the most important thing I had to try to work on is learning to have enough confidence in myself as a parent that he was going to be okay and I was going to be okay. And this was just a part of our journey. It was not the whole journey. And this was not to cure him in any way. It was to help better engage and then limit some of the more dangerous, excuse my beepy thing.
Totally fine.
Thank you, to limit some of the dangerous activities that he had so that we could better engage in public and at home. But I would say to any parent who is on this journey, who is learning and has questions, is to be gentle to yourself. I was not. I felt like it all had to be done. And if I didn't get it done, I was a horrible parent, and I'm still working on that. And then be gentle with your child, because again, having 8-9 hour days when you are 3, as if you're running a Fortune 100, looking back on it, I've apologized to him 50 times. And I don't think he knows why I'm apologizing, but it's something that I had to come to grips with for myself. So I grew up a lot during those 2 years. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think obviously every parent could relate to the idea that we all just want to do this right. Like we all are really wanting to get it right. And to have to look back and say, okay, that one place, I really shouldn't have done that. Or I messed that up. I'm not saying that. I just hear you saying that about yourself. I think that's a hard truth to like reconcile with yourself and also to share in a webinar full of strangers. So I appreciate you sharing that honestly like that. Kelly, how about you? What were your concerns going, or what did you learn as a parent from ABA?
Oh, I learned quite a bit actually. So it falls along, a lot of it falls along with Shayla's learning to just sort of forgive yourself. So for context, I was diagnosed with, at the time it was still DSM-4, so it was Asperger's, which is now merged in autism spectrum disorder. And my son was born that same year. So when I got diagnosed, and when I actually started going back to school and learning more about myself and more about psychology, was also the time he was starting therapy. And so for me, it was a lot about, I feel like I should already know this. I feel like I should know what we're doing. I should know what the next step is. Why is none of this working? I must not be a good mom. I must not be a good mom. I must not be a good person with autism. I must not be like doing any of this right whatsoever. What am I doing? And it took a very long time to sort of realize that the saying is true. If you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism, because my autism is different than his autism is different than his brother's autism. And it's different for everybody. The process of doing therapy is different for everybody. What works for one child is not going to work for another child. And that's the very much the case in this house. So it was a lot of, I need to just let go. I need to let go. I need to sort of just sit back and watch him, and what does he need and what does he not need. And all this stuff that I'm learning a lot of times goes out the window. I have an entire shelf in our spare room that the kids use that I call my therapy shelf. And it has all sorts of things on it because I work with kids, has all sorts of things on it. My kids are not interested in any of that. So anything that I know does not apply in this house because they're having none of that from mom.
Sure.
Everything just constantly is evolving and changing, and that's okay. It's all right. It's okay. And it's, yeah. It was a lot to try to absorb and learn and still let go of. And I'm still doing that because I'm still in school and I still work with kids and I still have kids. And obviously autism is not something that goes away. So it's constantly just a learning process. And it's hard for me to sometimes let go and say, okay, I don't have all the answers, not just as a mom, but as a professional.
Right.
Or even as a person with autism myself, I still don't have all the answers. And that's a really hard thing to continue to learn and accept. But it's a process.
It is a process. And just around the time when we get there, they're going to grow up and move out.
Oh my gosh, right?
Thank you for sharing that. I'm in that process too. And I do feel like, and then also just as you feel like you got a handle on it, they go into adolescence or they end up as young adults and there's a new approach and a new way to best support them. So yeah, that's a good one. Thank you. Sonia, how about you? What would you say you've learned from ABA as a parent?
I learned a lot of, the therapist, I was looking at that the therapist came home, they only come for, a short time, and just to give me a tool how to better support her. Remember that she lost all her skills and I had to start again. It was very hard because of her behavior. I had to start all over with brushing teeth, for her to learn how to take her own shower. And I learned that she's very stuck with routines. And then she also is not able to communicate. She helped me with to put up picture schedules. And for showers, she needs to have all the steps how to take a showers, and also for her daily routine every day. That helped us a lot. That helped me a lot with teaching Gabriela, because it was not an easy thing. When she didn't want to do anything, she would push you. And I have to make sure that I was not against something that will get hurt. So
Right.
She helped me how to manage with, her behavior and how to look for trigger behavior. And she also, I learned how she learned. She learned things in very small steps.
Right. And so the ABA therapist was able to teach you how to break new skills down into small steps and how to teach Gabby new skills you're on your own without the need of a therapist.
right, and how to talk to her. Because I didn't have an experience. My son is older than her, and he's a typical, you know, was a typical kid on that time.
Yeah.
So I didn't have no skill how to work with a child with special needs. So I learned how to talk to her. I cannot say no to her. I have to find the different way to say when she's doing something that for example, she's very loud when she speak. And then I can't tell her, be quiet, or I just can say inside voice, and she understand, and she goes down.
Right.
Yeah, so
you're learning new ways to get to the same result, but in ways that are less distressing to her.
Right.
I've heard other parents say that too, that their takeaway from ABA was like learning to communicate with their kid. And I think that's really powerful, because when you think about how hard that is as a parent to not be able to effectively communicate with your kid. You know, we talk about our kids not being able to communicate with us, but if we're not knowing how to communicate effectively with our kids, we're really talking past each other in a way. So I think that's really important, and probably made life a lot easier, I would imagine.
Yes.
So my next question is about what role we all would say we feel the voices of autistic adults and self-advocates play in the decisions we make about our kids. And I'd like to just share my answer to that before I ask you to share your answer, Sonia.
Okay.
My son, just for a little background, wasn't diagnosed as autistic until he was 13. So he had a developmental disability, kind of global delays, and very significantly impacted high support needs, but he didn't meet the DSM-4 criteria for autism. So for his first 12 years, I ignored any insights I would get about autism. Well, that doesn't relate to me. It doesn't relate to my family. When my son was 13 and he was diagnosed as autistic, I also happened to coincide with around when I started working at the ARC and working with a lot more, getting to know a lot more autistic adults. I started letting myself listen to what autistic adults were telling me about autism and about what it feels like to be autistic and what it feels like to be in an autistic body and to be in a world designed for neurotypical people. And my entire perspective on being Nate's mom changed. I feel like I changed from how to catch up or how to get better or how to make progress to how to support him, how to give him what he needs to feel good in his body, to feel good in the world. And it really, really made a difference in my parenting and in my relationship with Nate and my understanding of Nate and how his brain works. And I bring all this up because to me, the voices of autistic adults have been critical to my learning to be the most effective and most loving and supportive mom I can be to Nate. And listening to autistic adults is why it took me 16 years to try ABA therapy, among other reasons, but it's one of the big reasons. And it's why I watched his treatment, his therapy so closely, and why I occasionally felt significant levels of discomfort and had to kind of negotiate that with my spouse, with myself, with the therapists that were in the home, because I hear and take very seriously the voices of the autistic adults in my life who talk about what autistic youth need and also who talk about the concerns about ABA. So that's my answer. And I'd really love to hear, Sonia, since we were with you, why don't you tell us first what role you see the voices of autistic adults playing in your life as Gabby's mom?
In my case, it didn't play any, because the situation I needed to find a way how to support my daughter. And then I would like to hear what recommendations they have. So
Right, and they weren't making recommendations at the time. You were on your own to figure it out.
I was not on my own because I had the professional from the Autism Center.
Okay.
I actually took Gabby for ABA therapies before I got a ABA therapy at home.
Mhm.
I used to go there, and I saw how the therapist used to work with Gabby there. So, but her behavior were going even worse and worse. So I end up, I end up getting an ABA services
Mhm.
as soon as possible. The waiting list there was
Didn't
for,
see you.
2 or 3 years, and then I need it right now. So
Right.
I was glad that I got one. I didn't have any choice, and I think that I did the right choice,
Mhm. Mhm.
because they had their opinion, but I was at the doctor office, and then they say there is a medication, but I don't think it will help your daughter because her problem is because she doesn't know how to communicate. And if we give her medication, the medication could give her, the side effect was that the medication damaged her pancreas, could damage her pancreas, and then she became with diabetic. So I don't know. I don't know if that will call, they can call abusive or not, but I think I did the right thing. But I haven't, do they have some recommendation now how to work with a person, work, different ways other than the ABA services?
Yeah.
I would like to know that.
Mhm. And that's a perfect segue, because next week we're going to be talking more about that in the final installment of this. Not just, we'll be focusing on the professional aspect, including alternatives to ABA. But I hear what you're saying. Like, it sounds like you weren't being offered a whole lot of alternatives, and you were in a really desperate situation. And the medical providers right in front of you were saying, this is what you should do.
Right.
And it was helpful.
It was.
Yeah.
It was very helpful.
I hear that. Thank you for sharing that, Sonia.
All right.
Kelly, how
Thank
about
you.
you? What would you say? And I know this question is complicated because you're autistic yourself, as you've shared.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
That's totally okay.
I think for me, I sort of look at everything through a lens of, is this trying to change the way that I'm presented or my kids are presented in the world, or is this helping them to teach the world to adapt to them? Because for me, I think that when I look at the therapy that they do, or My youngest, like I had said, he's a darter and he has a tendency to take off and everything, or he gets very loud or he gets upset. Is it that people are so used to seeing something a certain way that they don't understand what it looks like to also have a normal situation, but it may not be what you thought everybody told you growing up? And so I try to just create an environment when they're doing therapy or going to school, or when they were doing developmental preschool. I just wanted to make sure they're in an environment that embraces who they are, their traits of their autism, where they are on the spectrum, and it's not trying to take anything away. And for me, that's a very important thing. I think
You're trying to add skills, not take away character.
right. And I'm trying to teach other people to recognize that what you've seen all this time, just because it's always been around you, doesn't mean that it always has to be that way. You know, one of the things that I had to self-advocate for, advocate for my middle son is that, and I just learned this term so much, he is gender creative. He chooses certain clothes because he wears leggings pretty much every day, because they are restrictive and they're comforting and they are soft. And I don't know why they're not in every section of a kid's clothing store.
I was gonna say, that's why all the women my age are wearing leggings every day.
Yeah. And he likes, you know, things with flip sequins and sparkles, and it's because it makes him happy, and that's who he is. And a lot of times, especially when he first started choosing things that he felt most comfortable in, because that's who he is. And, you know, I tried to put him in jeans for the longest time, it didn't work. So we said, okay, all the leggings you want, here you go, pick out whatever. Oftentimes going out in public, it can be difficult. And that's sort of, you know, part of where he's oblivious to it, because he is just himself and he's in his own world. And he's like, I'm very comfy in what I'm wearing and I'm great, and you go about your day. But as a parent, it is much more obvious. So I sort of have to just kind of create this little space when we're out, like, okay, this is how he is, and not everybody has to like it, and that's fine, but we're not going to sit here and pretend that there's something wrong with it, or that he needs to change who he is to conform to his autism presenting properly to other people, or to conform the way he dresses. And I'm not like, that's, to me, I just want to make sure that he's able to express himself the best way that he can. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I advocate for. I also, both of my children have different stimmings that they do. And I'm very, I've only had it happen once where somebody said, well, maybe we should stop doing this. And I said, we're not. This behavior isn't anything harmful. This is how they soothe themselves. And we're going to keep doing that.
It was a therapist who was suggesting you address
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I was like, no, we're not going to stop doing that. There's no need for that. It's perfectly fine. And we're just going to keep doing it.
Right. Thank you. I mean, one of the things that I've read about ABA that I think really gave me pause to think the most is that as a neurotypical person, it's impossible for me to really accurately assess what I'm seeing in an ABA session, because I'm not, because it's different to experience it or see it as an autistic person and through autistic eyes. And so I really do recognize that I won't be able to see that. And I appreciate you sharing that experience as an autistic person watching the therapy and what that feels like.
Thank you. I tried to just picture would I feel as though that what is going on is invasive? And I sort of just kind of if I start to feel that way, that's when I go, okay, other neurotypical people might not find something invasive, but the way that our brain works, if it's slightly uncomfortable, I'm just like, okay, I think maybe we should go about something a different way.
Right.
And I'm lucky that my children have had therapists who have been very understanding of that and are very open to, okay, well, how can I do this a different way that's that will be more comfortable.
Thank you. Shayla, last question for you, because we have like 5 minutes left. What role do you see the voice of autistic self-advocates playing in these conversations or in the decisions you make as a parent?
Absolutely. Huge. Their role is huge. When I was getting the directives from the clinicians about the therapies to place my son in, I didn't know any autistic adults. So I was making this decision purely off of what the professionals were saying to me and what I believed from what they were saying to me needed to be done straight away, immediately. I went to an Autism 200 series hosted by Seattle Children's Hospital, and that the panel was all autistic adults. And I remember just crying and crying and crying because that panel gave me so much hope. Everything that had been described to me about my son, for the most part, was pathologized down to a diagnosis.
Yeah.
It never gave room for personality. It never gave room for the child being 3. It never gave space for what kind of mood the baby was in at the time, or if this was a preferred activity or not. And it never talked about genetics in the aspect of some of the traits he had were just like his father, not me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But it
And I'm
never.
gonna guess also they didn't talk about culture or race
Nothing,
or
nothing,
family values. Yeah.
nothing. And so you're 100% right. So when I saw the panel of autistic adults, I got to see a range of expressions. I got to see a range of experiences. And I just cried and cried and cried because that was the first time that I was actually able to see that lens and view my child in a way that was a full person who was a baby who would continue to grow. And so from that point out, there's actually people who are on the call this evening that I would engage with or seek out to ask advice. And my question to the autistic adults that I knew would be, what would you want your parents to know about when you were growing up about how to engage and raise you that you could tell me now? You might be 22, I'm just using that number, and my child is 3. What would you like me to know? And that insight has not only helped shape how I raise my kids, but how I interact in the world, period, right? And so I feel that getting that insight that the autistic adults in my life are my mentors. I check in with them. The things that I share with them, I have no problem being told, Shayla, you're wrong as rain, or you need to work on that. And I also have no problem saying, all right, give me a minute because my baby's young and I'm still learning the game. But it is very, very much about the reciprocity in the relationship, hearing their experiences, and then implementing the things that I hear in a way that are relevant for my family, but are wholeheartedly true and acceptable. And even if I don't agree, I still see the validity in what was said. So I'm very thankful. And I believe that those in my life have helped me grow up. So thank you.
That was beautiful. That was such a good way to end too. That was really lovely, Shayla. I could talk about this for hours more, and especially this last question, because as I shared, as the parent of a kid who struggles to verbally communicate, I feel so grateful that I get to hear the voices of other autistic adults that might be saying what he might say if he were able to. Let me remove the spotlight. I want to thank our panelists, Kelly, Shayla, and Sonia, from the bottom of my heart for being willing to come and open yourself up. like this and share on a topic that we've said at the beginning is not without its drama, not without its controversy. And I'm just incredibly grateful for your willingness to talk and to share your experiences and to be here tonight. Thank you so much to everyone who attended. Keep your eye out. You're probably tomorrow going to receive an email with a survey, a very brief survey. If you could fill it out to let us know how we did, we would really appreciate it. And come back next week. We are going to be joined by a panel of therapists, ABA therapists, speech therapists, mental health providers, I think a psychologist, to talk about the types of support autistic people have available to them and how to be able to look at it and know, is this good? Is this bad? Is this harmful? Is this helpful? So that's what next week is going to be. And thank you so much again, ladies, for being here. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. Have a great night, everybody. Bye.